everybody. Welcome back to Pagan's Witchy Corner. My name is Pagan, and today I'm joined by a very special guest who is one of the prime voices in crystal magic, and that is Nicholas Pearson. Nicholas has written a lot of books about crystal healing and crystal magic, and we're going to talk about many of them today. But, Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
So you have so many amazing books out. As talking about crystals, when I spoke with Anwen Avalon, she said that you were one of the premier voices of crystal magic, and I absolutely had to have you on the show to talk about that, which was amazing. And she recommended so many amazing individuals as well. So it was so great to like have her be like, "Yes, absolutely. Get him on the show. You're going to love it. It's going to be great." And so and then we were talking before we started recording that your Crystal Basics book, what the white copy, it looks like there may be an extended copy as well. But that one I actually have had on my bookshelf for many, many years and never even realized it was yours until today. So it's so amazing how these really great things have come up. And I have referenced that book so many times, and it has been kind of the primary um, book that I have used in terms of trying to understand how crystals work, their properties, and everything in between. Because, if you're new to witchcraft, crystal magic can be a little bit daunting because there's a lot to learn from. So, what was your first fascination to bring you to writing about crystals?
I consider myself a lifelong learner, which is probably just a fancy way of saying I'm a big old nerd. And I've always been a bibliophile, a bookworm, whatever you want to call me. My head has always been buried in books, and when it's not, it's probably because I've put the book down to like pick up rocks from wherever I happen to be. And from a real early age, my grandfather saw this and gifted me my first piece of quartz, which kind of changed the trajectory a little bit of what I thought I was going to do with my life. And when it finally came time to put pen to paper, I started my first book probably around spring of 2014. I still worked my corporate America gig, and things were going pretty well uh, at that point. Although it didn't take long for kind of corporate buyout to shift things around a little bit, but I really started writing my first book as like an academic exercise, just this kind of like intellectual proof that I am capable of writing a book because I
Mm-hmm.
talked about wanting to do it for so long. And all of the other times I started, I gave up pretty early on in the process. I just had too many other things going on in life. And at least at that moment, I had a kind of work-life balance that allowed me to just write for fun. And I didn't really have strong intentions of shopping it around or doing anything with it until I could see what it was going to look like. And later that year, I took a big leap of faith. I left my corporate gig because the company, which is no longer around, had started a downward spiral after a buyout. And I ended up at a Body Mind Spirit trade show in Columbus, Ohio, the weekend of Halloween in 2014, and started chatting to reps from one of the publishers there. And it just, organically came out, which is a nice way of saying I made sure they knew I was writing a book. And they were excited, so they asked me to send in what I had, which at that point was exactly one chapter, just the one. And it worked out that I did eventually finish that project. It came out in late 2016, and I immediately set about writing the next one and the next one and the next one. And although I've slowed down a little bit as the years have gone on, here we are 10 years after negotiating that first contract, and I'm still excited about writing. I'm writing my 10th book right now. I've got plans for lots more. But it comes out of a love of learning, and hopefully a love of sharing what I learn with others, because I've been a teacher of all things rock and mineral, from the earth science side to the kind of mystical metaphysical side, for about 20 years now. And there is a limit to your audience. There's a finite number of bodies that can fit in a room with you, to take a class with you, to
Mm-hmm.
do a workshop. But books go out into the world on their own, and they reach people on their own, so it kind of widens the reach of that. So I love doing it both as an exercise in learning and as a means of sharing what I learn with others.
I think that's absolutely amazing. And you have written so many amazing titles about, everything from, Reiki, but most of your books pertain to crystals, which is wonderful. And you have obviously the crystal basics books, but you also have the crystals for karmatic healing, crystals healing for the heart, stones of the goddess, seven archetypal stones, and your new one, which is coming out in January, which we're going to talk a little bit about here in just a little bit, is crystals for the psychic self, or crystals for psychic self defense, which is an interesting thing that I didn't think you put two and two together, but obviously it does work. In my own personal practice, I don't use a whole lot of crystals, but I have other people in my coven who do, and so I kind of defer to them for the crystal work, whereas me, I'm not super big into them, mainly because I don't have the space to keep them all. I used to, but I just don't anymore. Um, but yeah, you have so many amazing things. So, in all of the different projects that you have done, obviously you have reached into different little genres in terms of these books. What would you say was probably your most exciting project and your most influential one?
Oh, that's a good question. So, um, speaking only about my books on crystals, I think the one that uh, as far as ones that are currently on shelves, the one that excited me the most to write was Stones of the Goddess. It is certainly the most magically oriented, kind of witchy oriented of all of my crystal books so far, although that's going to change with the next couple titles coming out. And I really just had so much fun writing it. Like every day I would sit down and dedicate my work to my relationship with the archetypes of the divine feminine, with the specific goddesses that are part of my witchy practice, my magical and spiritual praxis, and I allowed it to become an act of devotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed being able to weave together the seemingly disparate threads of geology and mineralogy and astrology and alchemy and witchcraft and magic, and just to find the place where all these different topics intersect was really fun. And it's a big book. It is heavy, it is wordy, but I really enjoyed it. And as far as my book that is the most influential, um, it would have to be Crystal Basics. It has done really well in terms of reaching a new audience, kind of bridging a gap between geology and metaphysics. Um, and not too long ago, its younger sibling came out, which is a pocket encyclopedia that is strongly inspired by it. So it's Crystal Basics Pocket Encyclopedia. It's got 450 crystals in it, whereas the big one that came out in 2020 has 200 stones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they are slightly different formats. They've got, there is fresh material in the little one, more than just an extra 250 stones. There's a little bit of new stuff about all the crystals that were repeated or recycled from the big one. But it took me 6 projects before I finally realized maybe I should write an introductory level book. So yeah, I picked all these like very niche topics, and finally with Crystal Basics, it was let's really hit the foundations, the fundamentals of my practice. Let's have a very common sense approach to working with crystals that draws a lot from what we can measure. We can't really measure magic in a tangible, quantifiable sense. We can have our own personal subjective experiences, but it's hard to quantify that. So I look a lot to the realms of physics and optics and other things that we can measure when it comes to how rocks and minerals interact with the world around them. And I use that as a kind of lens for exploring what those subtle energies and subtle effects might be.
Absolutely love that. And also kind of, bring it back to the stones of the goddess. I'm kind of curious, how did you link astrology and stones together? Because for me personally, that's a whole topic I would never even put two and two together there. That's really
So
fascinating.
yeah, so there are traditions of astrological gemstones that go back several thousand years. One of the oldest texts on rocks, um, which is in cuneiform on clay tablets, is in part an astrological lapidary. It also includes information about like the economy and trade of gems, their relative value at the time, their curative properties. But there are absolutely astrological, planetary, primarily links to all of these. So in Mesopotamia, Sumer, they had a really strong tradition of planetary gems. We see that develop a little bit further with Babylonian star magic, where we start to see gems incorporated with zodiacal correspondences, so linking them to the signs of the zodiac. And that eventually, thousands of years ago, lays the foundation for what we think of as like birthstones today in
Mhm.
kind of pop culture world. But even those are drawn from the same principles, at least in theory, as our occult correspondences. So I think astrology and gems go hand in hand, and they have for quite a long time. And while that book is not principally devoted to that relationship, we do see archetypes of the divine feminine in the planets and in the signs of the zodiac, chiefly with our archetype of Venus. Um, and that was something that I got to have as a thread that was woven through many of the entries in that book. There are 104 crystals. I know it's a weird number, but that's just what I came to after all of the back and forth with my lineup of stones in the compendium. But a lot of them have really strong Venusian archetypes, Venusian imagery, whether that is their historical um, symbolism, or whether that is something that we see in modern day approaches to working with crystal healing or planetary gems. So yeah, I've never been like a full-fledged student of astrology. All of the
Mhm.
astrology I've learned is from osmosis, studying other things,
Right.
whether whether it's been magic and occultism or rocks and minerals or whatever else it might be. So I'm definitely not like a proper astrologer, but I know just enough to get myself into trouble.
You probably know more than me. I know just enough to stay in trouble in terms of astrology. So, astrology is one of those ones that, for me personally, it's so complex that my brain has a hard time wrapping around it. And so I'm just like, you know what? I will leave that to the pros and I will be over here. So, in terms of, let's talk a little bit about your new book, and then I would love to hear some kind of introductory kind of points that you could give to some of our younger listeners. And so, the crystals for your psychic self defense. How did this book kind of come into being?
Honestly, it was firsthand experience. So I have been, we'll say, public facing in some capacity or another, part time, full time, somewhere in
Hmm.
between, in the crystal world, in the kind of spiritual world for a little over 20 years now. And like the number one thing people want crystals for is protection.
Of
Just
course.
it's one of the number one things people outsource magic for as well. Like, sure, we've got like our big five: money, healing, love, protection. We'll say psychic, spiritual stuff as the fifth one to cover a lot. But I think protection is the thing that brings a lot of people to crystals in the first place. And after finishing um, uh, crystal basics,
Hmm.
I took a little break from crystals to write a book on flower essences. I wrote that book in 2020 when the world was doing what 2020 did,
Of
and
course.
the lived experience of I work in an occult bookstore here in Central Florida, and have for quite a while. But in that frame, more than ever before, people wanted crystals for protection. People wanted things to feel safe in the world, to feel more ease and joy and comfort. And while crystals had always served as part of uh, my kind of psychic self-defense, my own protection practice, I really wanted to kind of create a manual that covered not just the basics, but also had advanced topics in it. There are a handful of pretty good books on crystals for protection that are out there. My late friend and colleague Judy Hall wrote one that went through many different iterations.
Hmm.
And it's a pretty solid intro. And I thought, why not create a manual that serves a lot of different people's needs at once? Whether it is our kind of empaths and highly sensitive folks who need more help say navigating the world with those kinds of filters in place, or our magical folks who are, just want generalized protection, but also might have specific things they're aiming for, binding work and banishing and neutralizing harm. So it's got quite a span of techniques and topics that it covers. It also includes a directory of 145 crystals, and I went back and forth on those crystals in that lineup so many times. Originally, I thought it was going to be a much smaller work, and
Hmm.
so I was aiming for 100 or less. It ballooned to about 175 at one point, but I really tried to kind of whittle it down to some really core essentials, and then also things that I've never been able to place in some of my other books. So I think it's something like almost 20% of the crystals in that directory don't appear in any of my other books. So that way I got to have new stuff in there to keep me engaged,
Hmm.
and also to reflect how my practice has changed, how I've learned about new tools and integrated new things in my own practice.
That is absolutely amazing. And just for the listeners out there, that book comes out in January of 2025, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I will have a link to Nicholas's website so you can get all of the books there because there's a lot of ones. And obviously, when it comes to the show description, we have a character limit. So I can't put all those links in. But there will be a link to Nicholas's website where you can go and get all those books and check everything out. I know that you also have classes available and all that as well, which we will talk about shortly. But that being said, in terms of if you were going to give some advice to somebody who is new to the practice of witchcraft and or crystals, what would be the advice that you would give them? And also, if you were approached by somebody who wanted to start healing with crystals, what advice would you give them?
So I think the advice I would give for these kind of seemingly different audiences overlaps quite a lot. First and foremost, the best thing we can do because of the overwhelming number of choices we have, if you go to even just a moderately well-stocked crystal shop, there are going to be more things than you can conceive of, especially if
Yes.
you're just starting to. If you go to a very well-stocked crystal shop, even if you were very far into your crystal journey, you're still probably like overwhelmed by choice. So, the first thing to do is take a step back from what you think you need, what you should have, like all of those places where we have like preconceived ideas of what ought to happen. Just suspend all of those for a moment.
Hmm.
Wherever it is that you're going to source your crystals, online, in person, uh, on a hike through the mountains, wherever it's going to be, and just reflect. Just see what stands out for you. Don't go in prescriptively going, okay, I need a crystal for X, Y, and Z, to manifest in my life, or for this kind of magic or that kind of magic, or to heal, these three things going on in my life. Instead, just see what you're most drawn to. Ignore descriptions on the little placards that are going to be in the crystal shop, because if I told you to tell me your entire life story in, two sentences or less, you're obviously going to omit some detail there, and that's
Of
kind of what
course.
when we get these, miniaturized descriptions of crystals, there's always more information than we can fit in that space. So just see what you're drawn to. There is a really high likelihood that what you're drawn to is exactly the magical ally or healing ally, that is right for you at this time. And even when you do read about it, be mindful of like where we source that information,
Hmm.
because a lot of it is based on subjective spiritual experience, personal gnosis. Some of it, of course, is, a long chain of written and oral traditions. As I mentioned, we have clay tablets, from thousands of years ago that include magical descriptions of rocks. We can't identify all of those rocks, but there is this literary tradition of summarizing what crystals do that has existed almost since the birth of writing. And um, there's always something more to the story, because for me, working with crystals is not really this kind of prescriptive A plus B equals C formula. It is more about the relationship we build with our stones. And I think as witchy and magical folk, we see the general trend in the kind of witchcraft communities and pagan communities is more towards an inspirited view of life. Whether we all identify as animists or not is another conversation to be had. But um, that the desire to find a world full of enchantment is an incredible way to drive your practice. If you seek it, you will find it. If you treat a piece of amethyst as an inert piece of matter that is an ingredient in a spell, you will get something out of that. But if you meet that amethyst as a being, as an intelligence, as a spirit in its own right, then the depth, the profundity of the magic or the healing that you're going to get out of it is so much more. And it will be individual to your relationship with that stone. I can pick up another piece of amethyst, potentially from the same mine, potentially from some other place on earth. And because I am a different being than you, and that is a different amethyst than yours, we will have our own relationship. So give yourself permission to experience something that isn't sanctioned by the books, that isn't in the memes that we see online, that isn't in the placards in the crystal store. By all means, use whatever references and tools you have available to you. They are useful, they're helpful. I mean, I write books about crystals, I want people to read them. But I never want that to supersede someone's own personal experience. The wisdom that the stones share with you should be the most important thing.
That is wonderful advice. And there's so much information, obviously, like you were saying, about crystals out there. And it's when you're trying to have a relationship with any sort of crystal or you're trying to start understanding how that works, it's, I would say, like half learning and half personal gnosis, like you were saying, because yeah, you can pick up a stone and the same type of stone, like you were saying, will feel completely different or even feel negative to you because that stone and you are not meant to be together. Even though it could be the same type of stone that, is sitting right next to it and it's like, oh, yes, I'd like to take you home. It's very interesting how that works. And I have spent many times in a witchy shop standing in front of, the crystal displays and looking at all the gemstones and everything, and you can just stand there for so much time trying to decide which ones work and what you're feeling and all these things, and eventually you come to decisions and you start to understand it and you're like, yep, this one's coming home with me and that's where we're going to go. And it's really great. It's a really fun experience if you're new to the practice, and allowing yourself that freedom to understand how that feels is also really exciting because it kind of gives you that really passionate experience when it comes to witchcraft that we all are seeking when we first start out, and you get to feel those vibes and those energies, and it's just so much fun. I highly encourage it. If you can go to a good crystal shop and actually just pour over the displays and do that, I highly recommend it because it's a very fun experience. It really is.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of your classes, you have a couple of classes that you are possibly teaching. I know that you teach Reiki, but do you have any other classes that you are would like to talk about?
Yeah, so I keep a pretty busy teaching schedule. And I teach things both in person and online. These days, the preference being online because it can be recorded and accessible
Mm-hmm.
in perpetuity. So my lineup is always changing. I have partnered with a handful of venues, and I also host some classes online myself. But um, every quarter I birth some new stuff. I also have a really large catalog of recordings of my crystal master classes, which are like deep dives on a single rock or mineral or a very closely related family, like the garnet group, for example. And all of those are available on my Patreon. But depending on when the show actually airs, there could be brand new stuff that I announce like a week after week. Yeah, there's always a lot going on. I'm looking forward to a chance to do some travel this fall and teach Reiki in person, to teach a weekend immersion on crystal alchemy at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. And then I've partnered with the College of Psychic Studies for a couple of classes on crystal related topics toward the end of the year. And then pretty soon I'll be announcing stuff for the new year.
That's so exciting. So, you have obviously so many great classes. Obviously, if you are somebody who's listening to the show and you would like to take a class with Nicholas, there is a lot of class information listed on Nicholas's website. But I will also make sure to include a link to Nicholas's Patreon so that you could subscribe there if you would like to. And all of your social links. Are you on social media anywhere besides like maybe Instagram or anywhere else?
Instagram is definitely where I spend a lot of time. So if anyone wants to find me there, I do live Q&A almost every week, sometimes more than once a week. I will, of course, have information about upcoming events and new books and other fun announcements. But you can find me at the Luminous Pearl on the socials, or at theluminouspearl.com, which will also include links to all my social media.
Perfect. Well, Nicholas, this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom about crystals. You're going to have to come back when the new book comes out so we can talk more about it and talk about all the other upcoming projects that you have kind of in the works, which will be exciting. And everyone who's listening, make sure you check out all of Nicholas's books. If you are somebody who is unable to purchase any of them, make sure you go request them at your local library so that they can order a copy or request one from another library so you can check it out and read them for yourself. But everyone, take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, be kind to yourselves, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye, everyone.